This story begins in a rather unusual place. Cameras everywhere because without them, there would be too many threats to life. A frenzied crowd waiting for the exit, the arena, the spotlight. The one they are waiting for must be a true star. But was it really like that? The overseer entered a room that resembled a prison more than anything else. A single beam of light fell on the prisoner, the only glimpse of brightness all day. Silence fell. They looked at each other like sheep. The boy woke up tied up, yet he appeared much calmer than the overseer had expected. The young man didn't understand where he was. He was in the arena, a short but comprehensive answer. To confirm these words, shouts erupted from above. That was the sound of the crowd only in the arena. When he looked up, he understood only one thing. The crowd was pleased with the fight. That was about to happen. And it happened. The throats of the people were simply tearing apart from the screams and excitement they felt. Violence gave them pleasure, but not to those who were fighting. However, the young man knew that when the fight ended, the people would want more. And then he would be next. But he no longer wanted to participate in the fights. He didn't want that. Yet the overseer knew that this would soon change, and he would turn into a monster who would crave the fight like a drug. What was he talking about? This was nonsense. That's what he wanted to say, but he didn't have time. His consciousness suddenly left his body. From that moment on, he would have a new life. He was stuck in this place, gradually losing his mind and living without any memories, until he died. The overseer carried the young man on his shoulders. He promised that it wouldn't hurt. When he woke up, he would immediately see the result. And if the boy was lucky, he might even survive. The overseer threw the boy's body as if it were a bag of trash, onto some large metal plate, after which the old man pulled a lever and the plate began to rise. He said the boy would be lucky if he never opened his eyes again. But at that moment, he came to. His veins were straining so much that they were visible even through his skin. His body began to boil. The temperature rose so high he was trembling all over. Suddenly, the boy sat up. Everything became bright, as if he were no longer in the basement. Because he found himself in the arena, the spotlight replaced the sun for him. Meet Ian. The camera turned directly on him. A true star, a crowd of people gazed at him. But our story is not about a fight club or fame. It's simply the story of Ian. He had to survive to escape this hell. This was his survival story. Meanwhile, the events shifted back to the past, to elementary school. The children answered questions in writing and then had to hand them to the teacher. The first question required them to describe their family. It seemed like a simple question, but not for little Ian. His father was an alcoholic. Sometimes he would get drunk and hit him, which the boy feared more than anything. Ian tried not to show his emotions. The next question was the hardest for the children. He wrote that it was a family. Suddenly, the classmate next to Ian turned to him. He saw what Ian had written and explained that he was supposed to write about what troubled him. Did he have problems at home? At first, Ian didn't understand anything. No one had ever asked him these questions before. Ian remembered this from the second grade of elementary school. They were not supposed to find out about it. But if the teacher found out, maybe he would help him. Ian approached the trash can and threw away the paper. How he hated all of this. Ian told his classmate that he misunderstood the assignment. He lied. That wasn't the only lie that day. He said he loved his family very much because they were always there and ready to support their son. How could Ian know such a thing? He always observed other families. His father hit him even just for not having an appetite or for eating slowly. The boy slept terribly, even when he was very sick, because he wasn't allowed to rest. His father watched TV late into the night. Ian told his classmates that on his birthday, they went to the amusement park. He heard that outside, some other boy was living his dream. When his father got drunk, he would yell at his mother, who left as soon as she gave birth. And he would ask Ian why he was even born. But to everyone, the boy said he was truly happy. Yet sometimes, even he found it hard to believe. Children always sense lies well. But that was okay, because soon Ian would improve his skills. He would endure all of this after he turned off all his emotions. Right now, he couldn't do anything and just had to endure. He needed to grow up faster. He just had to wait a little. Soon, Ian would grow up. He just needed to succeed and live his life just a little longer to endure. His name is Ian. He introduced himself to the committee, saying he really wanted to get into this university and fulfill his dream. He had been improving his grades and won many awards, and Ian's GPA really increased. But of course, there were nuances. His average grades were much lower than the passing ones, so the admissions committee was interested in Ian's opinion on this. It turned out that he had started studying much lower than others and initially felt inferior, but he overcame everything and grew. Ian began to feel a lack of a higher level of development than others, but he was confident that in the future, he would be able to overcome all of this just like before. He suddenly shouted again that he was sure of this, as if he himself didn't fully believe his words. But they believed in Ian. He passed the interview and got into the university. For a few minutes, he just stared at the screen. He simply couldn't believe it. Suddenly, tears streamed from his eyes. Everything he had kept inside burst out. He felt as if he had been awarded. All the hardships were behind him. He got into the university, and if he found a good job, he could finally live happily. Now he could live and smile. It felt so nice. He had never felt anything like this before. All he could think about now was plans for the future. But for a second, he forgot about something. One heavy day was replaced by another. These people didn't expect that the man they came for had a son. They beat the father again, saying that parents shouldn't treat their children like that, and asked him to prepare a payment for the debt by their next visit. After which they left, passing by Ian as if it were a normal occurrence for the boy. One of those men brushed against the boy and told him not to be like his father, after which silence fell. And darkness. Everything fell apart again. Ian stood there for a while looking at his father, who was hard to even call a father. The man spoke first, ordering his son to find a job. The events shifted to Ian's bed. He looked at the bills. 300 million won for one semester was pitifully little. He thought that this happiness would serve as his starting point. This was said from which he couldn't even take a step. But he overcame that then, and now he could. And Ian took that step. He hadn't feared anything for a long time and had no doubts. He hadn't rested at all, but no, he couldn't rest. He had trouble sleeping due to anxiety and worry. His body and mind were only working at half capacity. But something was off. Despite all the work and lack of sleep, his body was completely healthy and energetic. As if God had cursed his body, not to rest and constantly live in this hell. A message about the distribution of freshmen came to his phone, and next week they had a meeting waiting for them. A work partner suggested going for a walk next week, and Ian agreed since he had no plans anyway. Meanwhile, 3 months passed. Ian looked at his bills. He left work after a long day with the bills. It was still not enough. He needed to keep working. And in the morning, he had his first class at the university. He had to go there right after the morning delivery service. Time flew quickly. And after classes, he had to rush to work, then deliver packages, and then back to the university. He asked himself if he could do it. Just like always, just turn everything off. If he continued, he was sure it would all end soon. In such thoughts, he walked for a long time because he could turn off his emotions. At some point, Ian suddenly realized that he had walked quite a long way and had probably gotten lost. The whole world seemed so dark to him. Was it due to lack of sleep? Suddenly, everything began to regain color. Everything returned. He didn't even notice how a person flew right in front of him. Events unfolded very quickly. That boy flew a few meters away. Someone must have hit him. When Ian turned around, he understood what had happened and where he had ended up. It was some underground fight club. The boy with green hair offered Ian a sparring match. He had never seen him before, probably a newcomer. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he tried to refuse everything. Suddenly, money flew through the air. A pile of cash just landed in his face. Ian was promised that if he won, all that money on the ground would be his. Money was a topic that immediately triggered him. Oh my God, how much is here? Ian tried to refuse, saying he was going the wrong way and didn't know how to fight while counting the bills. But the young man said it would be more fun this way. He would give him a stack of cash as a bonus if Ian tried. The crowd began to shout. They wanted a show. Ian saw a stack of money in front of him that he could get just like that, in any case. He hesitated greatly and first wanted to know why they wanted to give him money for nothing. The answer was simple. Because this guy had a ton of money. So what would Ian choose? The boy approached the boss. There was a matter at hand. The boss decided it was because he had cut Ian's salary, but that was because he was a student, and it was the so-called commission. After all, at his age, it was hard to find a job, so he should be grateful for even such an amount and just deal with it. So Ian took the money. He agreed to the deal. The opponent noticed that Ian's attitude changed immediately with the appearance of money. Was he right? The round lasted 5 minutes. There were no rules, just a fight. While Ian hid the money, the opponent wasted no time and immediately threw a punch, aiming for the head. Ian didn't even have time to raise his eyes. But his body's reflexes turned out to be faster than his mind, so he deftly dodged the blow. Ian asked him to wait. But with money on the line, the opponent didn't listen and swung his leg. This was starting to get annoying. All Ian managed to do was put up a block with his hand. He was losing, but this was just the beginning of the fight and not a very fair start. Ian felt like he was drunk. even though he had never drunk. The hit turned out to be quite strong. The rich guy was having fun and reminded Ian that there were no rules here. He just had to fight. The boy sitting nearby reminded him that Ian could get seriously hurt and asked if an ordinary person could even participate. But the rich man didn't care, and besides, Ian wanted to fight himself. They were just having fun. And besides, Ian had come here for the money too, so the neighbor wasn't much different from him. This put the boy in his place. Meanwhile, the opponent immediately lunged at Ian, taking advantage of the moment. He had just managed to come to his senses, and all he managed to do was put up another block. The opponent didn't care. He started hitting Ian with punches, not even aiming particularly. But something was still off. The opponent froze for a moment, after which he delivered another blow, more precise this time. And again he froze in shock. The crowd also began to get upset that Ian wasn't fighting back and was just standing there. Then the rich man decided to steer the situation and suggested betting that Ian would be knocked out in 5 minutes. Even the opponent lost interest. He asked if Ian was planning to fight, but the boy remained silent. The crowd was already mocking the newcomer, saying that an ordinary person couldn't last. They had already started placing bets. The opponent realized that Ian was just planning to stand still and take hits while being given money. But in any case, everyone had gathered for fun, so the opponent was going to put on a show. However, he wasn't doing very well, so he grabbed Ian by the hair. He whispered that he also wanted to make some money, and for that, he needed to knock Ian out. He understood what that meant, after which a kiss from the opponent's knee landed on Ian's face. The spectacle was horrific, but the show was a success. The opponent told Ian to just fall after a few hits, and then they would both be in the green. Ian simply remained silent in response. Those hits were enough for blood to start dripping from his nose. He remembered how his father used to hit him in childhood and insult him. Back then, Ian learned to block and endure. It wasn't that hard. Well, he comforted himself that way. If he turned off fear and pain, then Ian wouldn't feel anything. Such evenings often ended in hospitals. After all, Ian's ability to endure led to his father not knowing when to stop and not stopping. On one of those trips, his father complained that his son had no appetite and didn't feel pain. Usually, everything was fine with Ian, according to him, but this time he lost consciousness. It turned out that the boy's brain was somewhat different. He had lost most of his nerve cells, and therefore his body didn't react to pain and hunger. The doctor said they had to come in regularly for checkups and treatment, but it all came down to money, the cost of treatment. If insurance didn't cover all expenses, then the doctor immediately understood what was going to happen. Those screams were heard throughout the hospital. The father didn't understand how treatment could be so expensive if his child had only lost consciousness once. So they left, calling everyone just frauds. That's how little Ian lived. He grew up, but nothing changed. His emotions were still locked away. Even when he grew up and became a student, his father still got drunk, but now no one was afraid of him. Ian simply ignored that scumbag. He said it was time for his son to bring out all his emotions, but who was listening to him now? From passers-by, Ian often heard that he was like a robot and no one understood what he was thinking. And when he went for consultations, there he often heard requests to sincerely share what was bothering him. Ian said he relieved stress through games and also found friends. But was that really true? Since he never showed any emotions. Those memories suddenly flooded over him. He completely didn't notice that the opponent was about to deliver another blow to his stomach. Although Ian tried not to react, it was quite painful. That man suddenly decided he had to stop them, as the outcome was too obvious. Suddenly, Ian felt he couldn't breathe. They asked him about this in the consultation, whether he could breathe. But Ian couldn't. When his breath was caught, and it became hard for him to do so, he simply didn't breathe. Again, a return to reality thanks to a blow now to the face. The rich man was saddened that they would finish faster than he thought. The opponent told Ian that he was doing great. The doctor asked him to explain how it was that he couldn't breathe. The state when he wasn't absorbing oxygen, when his body was simply sinking and becoming empty. Despite this, his body was completely fine. And just now, Ian confirmed that. Even if he wasn't breathing, even if he wasn't sleeping. When he worked like a madman, even if he lost his mind, his body still wouldn't break. The opponent was simply in shock. He had never fought with such guys before. The rich man was getting bored. He asked him to finish faster, as he had bet that Ian wouldn't last even 5 minutes. And if he didn't knock out the newcomer, he wouldn't get anything at all. It seemed that not only were the rules of the fight absent, but any rules were made up on the fly. And this arrangement didn't sit well with the opponent. He immediately hit Ian with all his might. He yelled at him like a madman and told him to just fall if that scumbag didn't want to fight, and then they would both get the money. But Ian remained silent. Another desperate blow from the opponent, but this time Ian dodged. How furious this joker got. Suddenly, Ian appeared right in front of his stupid face and said he had changed his mind and was going to take it all. The opponent was confused. He hadn't expected that. His punch was as crooked as always, but Ian's strikes were precise. He hit right on target. And then again, and again. The green frog paid for everything it had done. What just happened? Why did Ian want to fight? That man decided that Ian was just pretending not to know how to fight, but he had just looked like he was about to die. Suddenly, this scumbag realized that Ian wasn't planning to stop. On the contrary, he was speeding up. Everyone was in shock. No one understood what had just happened. The man was surprised that Ian wasn't even resting, but just kept hitting for several minutes. The opponent tried to catch the moment, but he couldn't because the blows didn't stop. Then, suddenly, Ian dropped his fist. He decided it was his moment. He made a strike. But it was as bad as his parody of the Joker. Ian delivered what was probably the last blow that sent the opponent crashing to the ground. And not just crashing, he flew back several meters. To say everyone was shocked is an understatement. How could a simple newcomer do that? Everyone was in shock. They were left speechless. But then it filled with joyful screams and shouts. And Ian got back into stance. He did everything mechanically, not even thinking. Then he looked down. He saw that pile of money that was supposed to be his. The man who was the only one to bet that Ian would win was happier than anyone. And the rich man couldn't come to terms with his emotions. He thought he had been openly cheated. Suddenly, an idea came to his mind. Meanwhile, Ian was gathering his money from the floor. Goldilocks wanted to know his name. For some reason, Ian decided to confess. The rich man complimented Ian, saying he fought pretty well, and admitted he hadn't bet on him at all. But he didn't care about that. Goldilocks expected a different reaction, but thought maybe Ian was just stupid. So he asked how he found this place, as it was quite far. People didn't just come here. But Ian honestly just got lost. It often happened to him. However, Goldilocks didn't really believe it, as it made no sense at all. Just stumbling upon a stash deep in the woods, Ian continued to gather money. The rich man decided that he wasn't lying, just a strange guy. Meanwhile, that pathetic parody of the Joker came to his senses. He suddenly realized that this player Ian wasn't from their team, so the fight was invalid. And the worst part for him was that he was acting so passively, just playing with him. How dare he? He had trained so hard and couldn't just walk away like that. Ian was told it was a no-holds-barred fight, but was he really ready for that? That rat approached the boy from behind. Then he swung a pipe, wishing Ian dead. He didn't even have time to understand what was happening, but right in front of his face, someone stopped the pipe. It was that man. He didn't just save Ian and his money. He also avenged him, smashing that scumbag's face into the ground. Ian didn't even have time to fully comprehend what had happened. That man ordered the frog to stop freaking out, as he had already received 2 warnings, and without a doubt, he would drive him out of there. Then he told Goldilocks that they shouldn't be spending time outside, as if Ian got hurt, they would have big problems. But he didn't care. Besides, he thought he did the right thing, as they found a great player. Ian was silent in a daze, waiting for the moment he could gather his money and just leave. Goldilocks told Ian that he had to join the next match, gave him a phone, and they would contact him when the date was known. After each match, he had to return the phone. They would issue him a new one, and he had to be present at all the fights if he wanted to stay. If Ian was going to participate in the next match, then Goldilocks had to warn him, after which he left. Ian stared at the phone for a long time, contemplating everything that had happened. The man spoke first. He decided that Ian was a schoolboy, not a student. He asked if this was really his first match as such skills, but Ian swore this was his first time. The man praised the boy's skills. He held his ground like a rock and didn't flinch, even when he was hit. But that was because he usually didn't react to such things. So the man realized that Ian wasn't a player. The young man didn't even know what he meant by the word player. He was talking about fighters who work for those who place bets. But now the man understood perfectly that Ian had nothing to do with it. So he forbade him from coming to the next match if he didn't want to die. Ian suddenly got scared. It turned out that everyone joined them at first for the money, but then realized it wasn't worth it. If Ian joined them, it would be very hard to leave afterward. This place was just honey for all sorts of scumbags, and even worse than that Joker. With that, the man finished his moral lecture. But in reality, Ian wasn't planning to get involved in all of this. This answer satisfied the man, and he left. Everyone dispersed. Ian was left alone with his thoughts. Then he left, pondering everything that had happened. He had the feeling that he had just woken up from a dream. He fought with someone he had seen for the first time. and earned more than he had ever earned before, even when he worked like a dog all day. And the pain he felt now proved that it wasn't a dream. But nevertheless, that dream quickly faded away, as if it had never been. Then Ian simply shut everything out around him, as always. On the way, he stopped by a store that was open all night. The clerk greeted him, but when she saw Ian's face, she abruptly fell silent. She wanted to ask something, but the boy didn't react, as if she wasn't even there. Silently, he took a bottle of water. Silently, he placed the money down, neatly without change, and silently walked out. The clerk thought he was just another weirdo, but something about him caught her attention. Then Ian headed home. He told his father he was back. That man was busy with something. The scumbag immediately started yelling that his son had no right to wander around all day and then crawl home beaten up. But the idiot abruptly shut his stinking mouth when Ian handed him the money and the card. The father told him to help everyone he could. There was $2,200 in the bank account, and with cash, it totaled about $1,400. After which, Ian silently went into his room. He collapsed on the floor as soon as he arrived. For the first time in ages, the house was so quiet and so peaceful. Suddenly, the alarm clock rang. Ian didn't even realize how he fell asleep. It seemed he hadn't slept at all. At 6 a.m., he had a part-time job at the sorting center. In that very second, Ian found himself at work. A regular gray day, gray people as always. Next on his agenda was university. Everyone was gathered. There was some mandatory session that was supposed to end when everyone introduced themselves. But was there really a person who didn't come to either the freshman orientation or their meetings? They thought there couldn't be. But they were mistaken. One student saw an empty spot on the lists. This made them even more curious, as no one knew anything about this student. Suddenly, someone called out the student's name. It was that clerk from the supermarket. But how did she know so much about him? It turned out she went to the same school as Ian. Everyone surrounded her with attention to learn the details, but it was in vain, as she and Ian weren't very close. Seun decided to invite Ian to the freshman gathering. It was a good opportunity to get closer. But she didn't think Ian would come. The students couldn't understand why, as they had a carefree life where everyone only worried about where to go out in the evening. She explained that Ian was just that kind of person and only did what he planned. It seemed to her that he didn't care about anything at all. Ian was heading to university. His boss called. He wanted to warn him that work was being postponed to the next day. Ian was upset by this. It turned out that his car broke down and he couldn't bring the inventory. The boss remembered that Ian was actually studying at university, so he wished him luck and hung up. Then an angry coworker yelled at Hyung that the foreman had stolen all their hard-earned money and fled. None of them were getting paid, but this guy was still handing out money to Ian. The boss said he had reduced his salary, but the partner was unhappy with a $10 cut, especially since they weren't the only ones who hired Ian. Hyung said that Ian was just a young guy who had just started his life, and if he was being cheated from the very beginning, how was he supposed to live on? The partner was still outraged, as Hyung was sending money to Ian every day, and not just pocketing it, but the boss didn't want to hear any of that. Meanwhile, Ian was glued to his phone. He finally had a bit of free time. Since it was the first lecture, he thought it would end after everyone introduced themselves. So Ian decided to just go home, which he didn't really like, actually. The others, meanwhile, were trying to get a good look at the newcomer. They asked Seon to talk to him. But she had already said that Ian wouldn't go anywhere, especially since she had a shift at the store. However, her friends were against it. They had already promised the upperclassmen that they would bring a nice person. But Seon didn't care. She had her own plans. Although her friends tried, they didn't succeed. Then their friend intervened and decided to call Ian himself. He showed up abruptly and immediately asked why Ian hadn't come to their meetings. Gunsu Park introduced himself while Ian tried to understand what was happening and invited him to the upperclassmen's party. Ian wasn't rude but said he didn't really want to go. But Gunsu Park seemed to not accept refusal and tried to find out the reason for his busyness. Ian said he had free time, but in reality, he just didn't want to get close to anyone. And moreover, he didn't have any money, not a single one. Gunsu Park kept peeking and said that if it was about money, he would personally give Ian a discount. He was quite close with the student council president, so it was a secret, but he just had to go with them, Ian pondered. Meanwhile, Seon was already at her workplace. Hana sent a photo of Ian leaving with them. She couldn't believe she saw that. What made him go with them? Meanwhile, the event shifted to the party. Ian took rice. He ate it greedily. A student asked if he came here just to eat rice, and Gunsu intervened, saying that Ian came against his will because he insisted. Hana intervened, ordered Gunsu to move over, and offered Ian a little drink. In fact, Ian had never drunk in his life. He saw the alcohol that Hana was holding. He immediately remembered his alcoholic father. He drank the same thing, and he rejected the idea. After which, he got up and left, saying it was time for him to go, but politely thanked them for everything. His friends immediately started persuading him to stay. Hana apologized for suggesting it, and Gunsu said they would go together soon. And Ian stayed. Hana said she loved people who ate a lot, and Gunsu said he needed to go to another table, but it wouldn't be long. Another guy with light hair was watching them. For some reason, Ian didn't leave him alone, so he decided to intervene, asking why he even came if he wasn't going to drink, as this place was meant for that. He boldly poured a shot for Ian. Everyone started whispering, what was wrong with this upperclassman? But Ian repeated once more that he didn't like to drink. However, for the upperclassman, that wasn't an argument. Ian took the shot. To be honest, he was even a little curious. After a person drank, they turned into this. And he couldn't even remember his own actions. His father always thought his son came home after a street fight. Ian decided that if he drank this, he would understand why people even drank alcohol. He immediately grimaced. It was disgusting. The smell of alcohol that came from his father, who beat Ian, now came from him too. But he still wanted to know. He wanted to know what his father felt when he hit him. The upperclassman began openly forcing Ian to drink, pretending to spill some of his alcohol on him. After they all drank, he shouted that it was time to bring a new bottle. The rest started paying attention to them. Even Gunsu got worried. But the upperclassman didn't understand why Ian still wasn't drunk. He himself was upset that nothing happened. It only awakened all the bad memories within him. So he decided it was definitely time for him to leave. Suddenly, the upperclassman latched onto Ian and started calling him names. He wanted Ian to sit down, but the guy didn't react at all. He knew how to handle drunk people. But for some reason, Ian wanted to look at his tormentor. And that became a mistake because in him he saw his father. Suddenly, everything began to blur before Ian's eyes. He recalled all the grievances against his father. Everything around him turned gray in an instant. Ian lost control. He grabbed the upperclassman, after which he threw him against the table. Everyone was in shock, even his new friends, Hana and Gunsu. That guy was just furious. He started hitting Ian in the head, not holding back at all, just like his father. But Ian himself remained calm. He asked the upperclassman if he enjoyed hitting people when drunk. This made him freeze in shock at such a question, after which Ian punched him in the face. This somewhat subdued the jerk, and Gunsu rushed over to the fight. Suddenly, Ian's father began yelling at his son that he had no right to sleep and was about to hit him. Ian quickly and sharply woke up from this. But it was just a dream. He was in bed, in Gunsu's room, and had scared his friend badly. However, it seemed Ian understood nothing. He asked Gunsu who he was and where he was. His friend thought Ian had forgotten everything because he had gotten so drunk. He brought him to his place and ordered him to sleep a bit more before leaving. Suddenly, Ian began to remember. He hit that jerk, after which Gunsu took him away. He shook it off and said he would take Ian with him. Gunsu was shocked that Ian remembered anything at all, but he asked him not to worry since the upperclassman had started the fight. He added that everyone at the party agreed that the upperclassman was a complete jerk. Ian fell silent. Then he raised his eyes and saw something strange. His reflection in the mirror. There he saw the face of an alcoholic father. Who had Ian become? Suddenly, he started coughing very sharply. Gunsu thought Ian was feeling sick and was about to throw up. He pointed to the bathroom. Ian did indeed throw up. Gunsu kept apologizing. He should have intervened when the upperclassman forced him to drink. It was Gunsu's fault. But Ian denied it, thanked him, and asked what time it was. It was 1 in the morning. He hadn't even slept an hour, so Ian insisted on sleeping a little more. But Ian couldn't. He was already late. He still had a part-time job at a delivery service. Gunsu was shocked. Ian had hardly slept and was going to work late. But for Ian, this was a normal routine. Gunsu didn't believe his friend had no hangover at all. Suddenly, something caught Ian's interest before leaving. The apartment was empty and small, 1 room and 1 bed. Did Gunsu really live alone? Ian said it must be cool to live by oneself. But for Gunsu, it wasn't so great since he had to do all the laundry and cleaning himself, so it wasn't very convenient for him. Ian remained silent since he had been doing it all by himself since early childhood. Then he asked if living away from family was quite costly since it required office supplies, housing, and food. But it turned out Gunsu's parents paid for everything. He was homeless. Ian sighed sadly. Parents pay for everything? He left, thanking him for everything. Gunsu was left with pleasant impressions in any case. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the university. To the chemistry lab. There, Seon was listening to a story about the fight at the party. As Gunsu said, everyone decided that the upperclassmen were to blame. However, the atmosphere was still tense, so it was good that Seon hadn't left. They changed the subject. This time, an assistant teacher, some upperclassman, was supposed to lecture. And ironically, it turned out to be that crazy guy from the party. Ian hadn't arrived yet, but the girls were already afraid of what might happen. And of course, at that moment, he walked into the room. They locked eyes, a tense silence. Everyone in the room fell silent because they all knew what had happened at the party. But nothing happened. Ian calmly sat down in his place. They were supposed to conduct an acid-based titration, so everyone had to be careful. After these words, the assistant's gaze was fixed on Ian. He put on all the protective gear. The upperclassmen kept staring at everything Ian did. From such tension, his veins were even popping out. He was just burning a hole through poor Ian with his gaze. A whole class passed. Everyone dispersed, and this crazy assistant was left alone. This jerk Ian ignored him after finishing the titration. Well, if he really wanted to act that way. The upperclassman wrote down the boy's name, deliberately, so he wouldn't forget. The girls discussed how the assistant kept staring at Ian, but they were more surprised that he didn't react at all. Suddenly, Seon noticed something. Her gaze fell on Ian. She declined her friend's offer to eat together because she wanted to do it with someone else. The scene shifted to the cafeteria. Ian was already there, eating his lunch alone. But it didn't last long because Seon decided to join him. She spoke first, greeting him. Ian remained silent, in a stupor. He looked around to understand whether she had sat with him on purpose or if there were just no other seats. She continued talking, saying she hadn't seen him in a while. Ian was silent again. It seemed he was just being dumb. Then he turned away again. Seon couldn't take it anymore and shouted. She told him that they lived in the same house and that Ian always went to the store where she worked and that they had gone to the same school for all those years. And now they were even studying at the same university. Last year, they had even sat next to each other. But Ian was in a stupor. He had never noticed this before. Seon couldn't understand why he looked so surprised. He couldn't have missed this all those years. But then she remembered that, actually, Ian had been like this since childhood. It seemed he was always busy with something else. And she had even told him that they had lived in the same house before. But even then, Ian always thought about something else, something of his own. And it seemed he always looked into the void. Back in school, he said that the first time he saw Seon, he didn't want to remember anything, distancing himself from the outside world. He was a complete recluse. And Seon, to be honest, had always been curious because it seemed he had built a concrete wall between himself and everyone. But why was he always around? And why did he always attract her attention? Moreover, she always thought they were at least friends. But wasn't it too much that he remembered nothing? They were neighbors in school, lived their whole lives in the same house, and now met at university. Did you also get goosebumps? Ian remembered absolutely nothing. Then Seon understood everything. She had just imagined their friendship, so she decided to leave. Suddenly, Ian declared that he remembered Lim Seon and even called her his friend. He explained that he usually didn't react to the surrounding world. Even if he met someone or if something was happening nearby, he just thought about it in his head instead of reacting in any way. But he remembered everything. Seon couldn't believe it. Finally, there was a hole in that wall for her. It was her small victory. So she sat down at the table and wished him a good meal. But still, Seon wanted to know why he had been looking around. It turned out Ian had just gotten confused for a second. Meanwhile, the lab results were ready. They submitted their reports in a box. Everything was freely accessible. Gunsu got an A+. It was hard to keep any work lower than a B+. But Ian seemed to have managed to do just that. He got a C! Everyone was in shock. It was clearly a low grade. Seon snatched the results from his hands and immediately headed to the lab with the results. She handed the report to the instructor, saying that something was wrong with the grade since the formulas and calculations were all correct. The instructor himself was shocked because he and his staff checked all the lab work. But who had checked this? But it didn't matter. The instructor immediately corrected the grade. Suddenly, Seon's expression changed sharply. All because she saw that assistant and understood everything. He had obviously heard this conversation. His furious face gave it all away. Soon they discussed this news. Everyone was just furious. Hana asked that next time Ian definitely let them know, and they would help. He agreed, for form's sake. Hana decided to act decisively and suggested having lunch together if he was so grateful. Everyone fell silent. Was this an invitation for a date? Gunsu, the idiot, asked if Ian liked Hana, why she suddenly called him. Her flushed face spoke for itself. The situation was resolved by Hana's friend, who said that Ian definitely had to take a walk with her. But he had a part-time job. Hana immediately reacted to this. She asked about the next day, but there was work then too. And the day after, work. Hana didn't give up and suggested just meeting on the weekend, but there was always work for Ian. She suggested meeting during a break between work, but there was work there too. It seemed this was the end. She was just brushed off. But then she triumphantly suggested having lunch at the university. A pause that seemed to last an eternity for Hana. But Ian agreed. He had no work at the university. So they arranged to have lunch together at the university. Meanwhile, the bus arrived and everyone said their goodbyes. Seun and Ian were riding together since they lived nearby, and she couldn't help but notice that Hana liked Ian. But Ian didn't understand why, as he hadn't done anything for her. Seun speculated that perhaps Hana liked Ian's looks. This clueless fool didn't get it and asked how he looked. Seun cleverly suggested that Ian look in the mirror and figure it out for himself. Ian fell silent. After all, he tried not to look in the mirror at all to avoid seeing his father's reflection. He confessed to Seun that sometimes he saw something entirely different in the mirror, but he didn't want to reveal the details. This secret was his alone, and he had never told anyone. However, Seun wasn't interested in that. She wanted to know what Ian thought of Hana, but he responded with a question of his own, asking if Hana was really as sweet as Seun said. At that moment, she was sure that Ian wasn't very bright. Seun began to get annoyed, thinking he was acting that way because he didn't want to answer honestly. But she never got her answer. So, Seun decided that Ian just wasn't interested, that's all. He said it might be because he had never thought about it before. His stop was next, so they said their goodbyes. Seun watched him leave. Although Ian had entered university, he still hadn't changed much. Meanwhile, it was getting dark. Time flew by quickly at the university. Ian was smiling all the time, which was very unusual for him. Hyung decided that the students simply enjoyed being at university. Then, everything was as usual, night and the road home. Ian had to stop by home to grab a quick bite before heading to work at the sorting center. Even though this day passed like all the others, Ian felt unusually good for some reason. He felt like he was living a normal life. But that feeling always dissipated when he walked through the door at home. There he found those people who were beating his dad again. Ian didn't even pay attention at first. It was familiar to him. But suddenly he remembered. Why was his dad being beaten again? He was supposed to pay the money. Ian had earned it. But those bad people knew nothing about the money. Now the questions were directed at his father. Where had he put it? Ian had given him 16 million won. It was necessary to check all the accounts, as people didn't believe Ian. It turned out that this alcoholic had withdrawn all the money and probably lost it. Silence. But what could Ian's father say? This only angered those people more, as this idiot thought he could repay the debt by gambling. For this, they started beating him again, even harder. The collectors promised that they would be meeting very often from now on. For Ian, it was nothing new. Everything was repeating itself. Before he could feel a glimmer of hope for happiness, he had to prepare for true despair. When would it all end? He managed to endure everything and keep moving forward. Ian continued to rise up, but there was nothing up there. Suddenly, a notification came through on the phone they had given him. Fight Club. Could this be a sign? Everything revolved around money. It was the root of all problems. Ian abruptly opened the door. There they were, those people who had told him about the club. And that joker, now he was getting it from the clown. Ian declared that he had come here to participate. In the Fight Club, it was, as always, shouts, fights, and the strong smell of male sweat. The rich guy didn't understand why Ian was late. But no one believed that this kid would actually show up. However, Goldilocks believed that Ian would appear at any second. And at that moment, someone actually did show up. But it wasn't Ian, it was, oh no, another failed parody of the Joker. Suddenly, everything froze for a second. But it seemed they weren't happy to see him here. The clown had come to this place to fight, wasn't that obvious? But he was told not to come back because he had killed someone during a fight. They were still clinging to the past. The clown had thought it all over long ago, back last year. It seemed he didn't understand that his entry to the Fight Club was permanently closed. But the rest, could they really miss his fight? After all, once he left, all the fights would turn into playground squabbles. And the clown turned out not to be stupid. He knew exactly which strings to pull. And that wasn't all. He had a little gift too. One click of a lock. And a rain of money scattered all over the room. But what, had they never seen money? However, these people were no different from animals, grabbing the money like madmen. No one was against that clown anymore. He understood that one person couldn't stand against the crowd. And the clown was already provoking someone to attack him. The Joker, of course, fell for this cheap manipulation. They tried to stop him because that scumbag wasn't here to participate. He had come just to hurt someone. From the very beginning, he didn't care about winning or money. He just wanted to hurt others. He was just a psycho. Suddenly, the Joker locked eyes with him. That face, how terrifying and deranged it was. He didn't even have time to blink. In that very second, the clown charged at him. He was too excited. Even a glance provoked him. The Joker immediately got hit in the head. The crowd picked up the fight, thinking it was just like always. But it wasn't. This wasn't a fight between two in the Fight Club. This was a brutal beating that no one could stop. The boss ordered his partner not to mess around. Didn't he understand what was happening? If he stopped this, he would be the only one to blame. Damn, he was right. No one could stop or overcome the clown. He wasn't thinking at all. He was driven by some unknown force that craved blood. And all the poor souls who became his victims, the best thing for them was to pretend to be dead. Otherwise, they would become just that. It was at that moment that Ian walked in. The Joker should have been grateful to him, as he was the only one who stopped this madman. Ian's mistake was to announce so loudly that he had come here to participate. Everyone clearly heard, and no one would forget such a declaration. The boss was pleased with Ian's arrival. But no one remembered him, and it was no wonder. He was new. And that man was furious that Ian had come. He had explained to him that it wasn't worth it. The clown had already lost interest in the previous victim, as he had found a new one. He decided to show this to everyone with his appearance, tossing the Joker up. The poor guy fell right at Ian's feet, barefoot. The newcomer hadn't yet figured out what was happening and what his role in the club was. And here some clown wanted to start a second round. And the worst part was that the crowd supported this. This was it, that feeling. The pleasure he got from beating people. Only at these moments did he feel true enjoyment from life. He wanted to feel more. And the clown was used to not denying himself pleasure. Ian was to become his next source of enjoyment. The clown couldn't wait to hurt this newcomer. He struck right in the ribs. His fist felt the bone break. Oh yes, this was exactly what he got high on. Finally, fresh blood. Now he would see how Ian would just writhe in pain. But that didn't happen. Ian didn't react at all. Well, no, he did react with a punch to the face. The crowd erupted with a scream at that moment. The first blood spilled in this round, and the first blood of the clown in a long time. This puzzled him, but it was something new for him. He accepted these new rules of the game. Another hit. Maybe the opponent just liked it, but this time he wouldn't hold back. As always, the clown immediately stared at the opponent's expression to savor the suffering. But again, there was no reaction. It seemed the clown's fist hurt more. But how? How was this possible? This wasn't the kind of pain that could be endured like this. While he was in a daze, Ian landed another punch to his stupid face. So hard that the short guy flew back several meters. The overseer couldn't understand how Ian was holding up. He had definitely taken a direct hit, but why didn't he even flinch? However, the clown was showing with all his appearance that he had taken a significant hit, even though he tried to hide it. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore and started screaming. Who was in front of him? What was happening? Ian remained silent, as always. It could give the impression that he was mute. However, something was different this time. Previously, he had felt a weak pain, but now he felt nothing at all. His senses had never disappeared like this. Why? While Ian pondered this, the clown rushed to deliver another blow. He was already curious how long the opponent could hold out like this. Ian stood in a block as numerous blows rained down on him. He simply accepted them, devoid of any emotion. He decided to deliver a counterstrike. But on the third attempt, the clown learned his lesson and dodged. And thus, he managed to land another punch right to the jaw, after which another one followed. Ian again took up a defensive stance. The crowd was screaming, their mouths wide open. It seemed not just one clown was reveling in the brutality. Ian held on. His opponent wouldn't last long like this. After all that fueled him was the pain, and Ian denied him that pleasure. However, he was unaware of another side effect of fighting. Some punches led to knockouts. And there was nothing anyone could do about it, not even a tough nut like Ian. The last thing he saw was a hand. The clown grabbed Ian by the throat. They weren't done yet. He hadn't gotten his satisfaction. The clown thought his opponent would prove to be stronger. After all, they said Ian was quite strong. Could it all be a lie? He even felt a bit bored. The clown's interest faded as quickly as it appeared. That's why he didn't have a girlfriend. Interest faded quickly in all parts of his body. He decided this was the end of the fight. But the biggest mistake among fighters is celebrating victory too soon. Ian came to his senses, but the clown did not. That's why he received a punch right to his dumb face. The clown was so stunned that he still didn't understand how Ian was holding on. He didn't even realize that he had just gotten his butt kicked. Ian's punches were much stronger. The clown couldn't hold on like he could. It takes a lifetime to train for such mastery. At least somewhere, Ian's skills were useful. The clown erupted into hysterical laughter. What was wrong with this loser? He was losing his mind. Soon he wouldn't be able to hold back anymore. He would either do something or embarrass himself in front of everyone. The latest failed impersonation of the Joker chose the first option. Since there were no rules in fights, the clown decided to use a choking maneuver. Now Ian could no longer lose consciousness. His opponent was counting on that, because he was planning to kill Ian. So, what would he do now? That's it. It was time for him to die. The clown felt Ian's body stop resisting. He laughed with satisfaction. But, as already mentioned, the biggest mistake is celebrating victory too soon. The supervisor tossed that crazy loser aside. Now he wasn't holding back, as the clown was trying to kill someone again. But he found it amusing. He didn't even hide his motives. Ian quickly came back to his senses. The clown couldn't understand how his opponent was still on his feet. The supervisor declared the match over. The clown and the others had to collect all the money they bet and leave. The crowd was furious. Who was he to decide that? And the clown was in shock. All he had left was to remember. And that made him laugh. He recalled how he inflicted pain on Ian, even though his opponent didn't show it. Suddenly, the clown laughed so hard, just like a madman. Meanwhile, the supervisor took Ian aside to talk. What was he thinking? Why did this young man even come? He had been warned. The answer was simple. He needed the money. How it irritated him. That's exactly what he told Ian last time. The supervisor gave him money and ordered him not to come back. But Ian refused it, asking to be told when the next match would be, returning the phone. The man's veins bulged in anger on his forehead. He roughly shoved Ian against the wall. Had he completely lost his mind and didn't realize he had just nearly died? But Ian didn't care. He had never felt truly alive anyway. Those words sounded emotionless, but they pierced the heart of that man like an arrow. At that moment, the boss arrived saying Ian's opponent this time was very weak. He handed him a new phone and money for participating. Ian was to come again and try to win even more money, and he agreed. The supervisor was furious. He said Ian was just a stupid loser from the very beginning. Dozens like him came to this place, but all of them left with broken bodies, so he wouldn't regret it later. The boss told him not to listen to him. He was always poking his nose where it didn't belong, especially since he had been there longer than anyone. Ian wanted to know how much that man earned. If he continued to come here, he wanted to know how much he could ultimately earn. The boss spun a nice tale about how Ian could earn himself a good name, win many matches, and then not worry about money at all. Ian believed it and wanted to participate in a big match right away. The boss was stunned. He had nearly been killed. What big match? He told Ian to just come to the next matches, show himself, and then Goldilocks would lead him to something bigger. After which he said goodbye. Ian was left alone again to ponder all this. Although no, this time he had a stack of money with him. Once Hyung asked him why Ian worked so much. He heard that the young man worked in delivery until the early morning. He was just curious about the reason why Ian exhausted himself so. He remained silent, thinking about where to start. Events returned to reality, where Ian walked home in the dark, holding the money openly in his hands. He was utterly exhausted, but that was a usual state for him. When suddenly, this time, something fell off. Ian began to cough violently. And there was blood on his hand. Where did it come from? Hyung said it was good that Ian worked hard and endured all the hardships of life. But he feared that if such a young guy continued to keep everything inside, he would eventually break. Even if Ian didn't feel psychological and physical pain, everything had a tendency to end. He entered the apartment. His body was on fire, sweat streamed down like a river, blood did too. There was no one home, it seemed. He had work soon, but why was it so hard? His body? Hyung was right, everything had its limits. At the part-time job, Ian was noticed missing. Everyone was shocked. Ian never missed work. The boss ordered them to contact him, and if he didn't come now, he wouldn't get even 1-1 by the end of the month. Otherwise, they would have to work in place of Ian. But they couldn't manage, as Ian had much more work than one person could handle. The worker wasn't lying. Ian did much more work, just like a robot. He asked the boss not to scold him when he returned, as he was the youngest among them. Events shifted to the university. Classes had already ended, and Ian still hadn't arrived. Had he really abandoned Hana? Gunsu decided that his friend was probably at work, while Hana began to worry that something had happened to Ian. And no one even had his number. Hana couldn't find peace. Meanwhile, it was getting dark. Seon was returning home. I shouldn't say this, but she was actually worried about Ian too, since they were friends. She recalled all of Hana's worries. It affected her too. So Seon decided to stop by his place for a minute. She knew Ian lived in a semi-basement apartment. Although it would be strange if she went looking for him, she decided to head home instead. Suddenly, her expression changed sharply, for she saw that the apartment door was ajar. Did Ian live there? And there were bloody traces. No, now Seon simply couldn't not check on her friend. She rushed into the apartment. It wasn't far to go. For Ian's body lay right at the entrance. He had been lying there all night. Seon began to wake him. She had to call an ambulance. It turned out that Ian was unconscious, but still somewhat conscious. Later, he was scheduled for surgery. The doctors were amazed at how the boy could even breathe in such a state. They concluded that Ian had felt excruciating pain before losing consciousness. Hope remained for a miracle. Meanwhile, a new day dawned, morning. Ian woke up to the sound of birds singing outside the window. When he opened his eyes, he immediately came to his senses. His heart raced. Where was he? Had he missed work? University? All thoughts suddenly stopped in his head, for he saw that Seon was sleeping beside him. She immediately pounced on him with questions. Who was he anyway? The doctor said Ian wouldn't be able to move his body. A brief pause of silence, so typical for him. And Ian asked who she was. Another silence. Seon just exploded. Was he trying to joke right now? Ian then recognized his friend Seon. Ian was literally on the brink of death. The doctor said he was alive by a miracle. Oh, Seon was so shocked to see Ian in such a state. What had happened? Ian replied that it seemed he had lost consciousness. Mr. Obvious. Seon already knew that. Ian explained that he had simply overworked himself at work. Although the guy had learned to deceive all his life, he still wasn't very good at it. Seon asked why no one was home and where his family was. Ian lowered his face, said he lived with his father, but he didn't come home often. Then he asked what time it was, as he had to go to class. Was this idiot even in his right mind? Seon said he was fired due to hospitalization and asked for his number to send information about the assignments. But Ian couldn't do that. He still had to work. Seon just couldn't take it anymore at that moment. What an idiot! She ordered him to lie down. While she went to university, she would bring friends and tell the doctor that Ian had woken up. But the friend asked her not to tell anyone. He wanted only Seon to know about his hospitalization. It was strange for her, but if that was his wish, after which Seon left. Ian thanked her just before she exited, and she suddenly stopped. He just now realized that Seon had been with him all this time. She was honestly in shock, as Ian had said he processed information only in his mind, but apparently he was good at showing it too, after which she definitely left. What was Ian feeling now? Meanwhile, events shifted to work. The boss was furious that they still couldn't reach Ian, but 2 weeks had passed and the worker couldn't get in touch with him, so it was worth just giving up. Meanwhile, Hyung was also coming back from work. Suddenly, Ian called him. It had been a while since they spoke. He couldn't come to work for a while because something had happened and he apologized. But Hyung wasn't angry. He understood everything and asked when Ian would return. However, he thought it wouldn't be soon. Hyung didn't accept apologies. Ian had to do what was more important for him at that moment and wished him luck, and the student promised to repay Hyung next time for everything. No payments. The boss remembered how hard Ian had worked for him. Hyung was just glad that the student wouldn't get hurt and would lead a healthy lifestyle. Ian was truly grateful to him. The conversation was cut off, and at that moment, a notification came in. Ian understood in advance what it was about. Fight Club. What would Ian choose this time? The answer was obvious. Seon came the next day, but she was very shocked when she saw that Ian had suddenly disappeared. The nurse said it had been a long time since the patient left the hospital. Seon was upset. She thought they were friends, but Ian hadn't even told her anything. Meanwhile, events shifted to the same place. Fight Club. It was Ian's first match. He had been well prepared for this. During this time, there was good news. That clown had no good track record, so he wasn't allowed to participate. Ian didn't care, but he promised from that moment on to participate regularly. The fight began. A bunch of joyful screams. Ian felt needed in those moments, even though he didn't realize it himself. Meanwhile, the friends received delivery for their picnic. Gun-soo brought up Ian. They hadn't seen their friend in a long time, and Hana was so sad that she even cried. Seon lied that she didn't know anything, but their attention quickly shifted to the food. While they enjoyed themselves, Ian was getting hit hard in the face. The friends decided to play together. They were having so much fun. And Ian's opponents made futile attempts to defeat him. He simply wouldn't fall. The group had a delicious meal and decided to gather again for such a game. Meanwhile, Ian earned himself a reputation. Everyone knew him and joyfully shouted his name. The beaten student, with trembling hands, collected money after the fight under the crowd's cheers. Was this the kind of fame? Ian understood somewhere inside that something was wrong. But the money clouded his mind, and this club had messed with his psyche. Ian, as always, stood in front of the mirror, washing up after the fight. The boss came in with his security. Goldilocks reminded Ian that he had once told him he wanted to participate in a larger match. He noticed that the student was too skilled to be here. The same went for that grumpy guy. Ian hadn't seen him in a fight. The reason was that he had no opponents for these small matches. So Ian had to go with them to participate in more significant bouts. He remained silent, but they were already used to him. And they understood that silence was always taken as agreement. They all left the locker room. Events shifted to the real ring. While the cleaners were scrubbing the floor of blood, Ian and the boss entered inside. This place was different from where the guy had fought before. There was a manager here. Goldilocks said they would watch Ian's match in the hall, and the big guy left. The boss suggested they sit in the back to avoid attracting attention. It wasn't worth it right now. But that was hard to pull off with Ian's face. Suddenly, the guy from the ring addressed Wancho Park. It turned out that was the big guy's name. The opponent mocked Wancho Park, provoking him. But he didn't take the bait. Had he learned this from Ian? However, the opponent had more strings to pull. He asked if Wancho Park had paid back all his debts to that sly scoundrel. He had told him that his friend would die anyway. Did he borrow a ton of money to try to save him? The ginger monkey didn't stop, saying that Wancho Park's friend had committed suicide because it was too hard for him. In the end, he added that it would be better if the big guy got sick and died right now. Suddenly, Wancho Park stopped. But then he moved on. He stood firm like a rock. The opponent was irritated that he was being ignored. Ian asked Goldilocks why that guy always fought, since it didn't seem like he enjoyed it at all. But the answer was simple. No one here loved to fight. They were all just making money. It turned out that Wancho Park had a friend for 30 years who had participated in these fights before him, and the friend had hidden this from everyone. But his drug addiction caused a heart attack. He was sent to intensive care. That's when it all happened. The meeting of Goldilocks and Wancho Park. He came with the phone number of the fight club owned by his friend, and he asked for money to pay the hospital bills, saying he would return the money from the competitions. Goldilocks agreed. But his friend had undergone 3 unsuccessful heart surgeries and lived connected to a breathing machine. And so the payment for the hospital bills became too large for him to repay everything. It seemed his friend knew all of this. He committed suicide. After that, Goldilocks decided that the scoundrel Wancho Park would run away, but he kept his word and thanked him for the opportunity to talk with his friend, even if just a little. Honestly, Wancho Park didn't belong in the fight club. He was too kind and had many weaknesses, just an idiot. Now Ian had pieced together the puzzle. He understood why he had been turned down all this time. Meanwhile, the fight had already started, and the opponent continued to mock. He asked Wancho Park what his friend would think if he saw him right now. The big guy closed his eyes, after which he apologized on behalf of his friend for pretending to live well and asked not to be such a loser, to win no matter what. After which the fight began.